Okay, welcome everybody. Today's webinar is about how to create overlays in i2. My name's Pete Swinney and hope you find this interesting. Today's topics are what is an overlay, explain that for people who don't understand the term, what can you learn from them. We could never explain what you could learn completely about overlays. It's an enormous amount, but we'll cover it briefly. How to create a single overlay, and how to realign the overlays. These are the laps, one lap on top of the other, how to align those laps. We'll explain the term delta, which is a difference, and we're going to talk about distance and beacon accuracy, and how to view data based on time and distance. Talk about a variance and creating multiple overlays. Now it's useful if you haven't viewed the how to insert beacon webinar, or if you don't have beacons in your data or anything to do with adding beacons. That webinar is now online, and you can learn about creating laps, which is what you really need to do in order to create overlays. So what is an overlay? It's effectively viewing two pieces of similar data recorded at different times. Now that data could be from the same race, and it could be the difference between two laps. And in circuit racing this is very common, whereby a customer or a driver would look at the difference between his fastest lap and other slower laps and try to determine why that particular lap was fast. What part of that lap was he particularly fast in, and why was that? Look at the differences between the faster and slower lap and locate the channels and recorded information that tells you those differences, and work out why there's a difference in time. It's definitely an accurate way of seeing different information, a very quick way of finding differences between two pieces of data, as I said. So we can overlay multiple laps, single laps, and look along those laps at a glance and locate problems that you wouldn't see if there were just one piece of data there. One speed trace by itself may not look unusual. If you overlay it, as is the case here, and the RPM and speed here, we can very quickly see that there is a problem with the coloured overlay here. So either there's a problem with that one, or the black trace is particularly good. Either way, we want to keep encouraging the driver to create the faster trace here. So we overlay data to locate those variances. What can you learn from overlays? Well, globally, it's a means of measuring accurate differences. So we are looking for differences in driver behavior. So there's a whole host of sensors that we can use to do that: steering sensors, throttle sensors, speed. We can look at vehicle performance data, so things to do with the vehicle, how it's handling, the G in the corner, things like that. The tuning guys are going to be looking at the engine, so how many RPM it's pulling, the oil pressure, the tune, the lambda, the air fuel ratio, things like that can be looked at very quickly using overlays and see if there's a problem creeping in. Look at those differences. So it's all about measuring the performance gains and losses. So if the customer is racing, then we're looking at information regarding keeping the car reliable, the boat reliable. Testing, we're looking to see gains or losses based on things that we have changed. Again, in the example below, this is two tests whereby the customer has lifted the boost on this particular engine. You can see that the boost has gone up over 1 pound. We can see that from the overlay that the throttle position is the same. The RPM is the same, but in fact the speed is the same, so the gain from the extra boost has been marginal. Maybe there's some other conditions affecting it, but if we were to look at these two pieces of information separately, it would be difficult to determine, one, if the boost had actually gone up because it's only a very small amount, and two, if there had been any gains or losses. So how do we create a single overlay? And the lion's share of your data analysis initially as learners will be just doing single overlays. So we bring out the flyout box from the left-hand side of your window, the data box, and in here there are a list of files that you have opened, and within those files you should have laps. There may only be one file, and so today's example file is from Bathurst, run recently by one of our guys here. Jamie took his wonderful Datsun 1200 to that race, and he's come back with some data for us to look at. We have in this particular outing recorded 6 laps, and it's defaulted to the fastest lap, which here is 2 minutes and 41 seconds dead. Now we want to maybe overlay the lap that I've chosen for this example is to overlay lap 3 and 4 together. Now we simply click here to determine the main overlay lap, or the main lap to look at, and that's determined by the circle and the red dot inside. So if we click on there, I'm normally looking at data, that would be our main lot of data. The colour of each graph, the colour of each channel is obviously programmable by yourself, and you would normally have simple things like RPM, throttle position, maybe for driver analysis, steering position, things like that, laid out nicely and different colours so that we can easily view the data. Now when we go to overlay a separate lap on top, to make it easy to determine which is the overlay data and which is the main data, all the colour of all the channels on the overlaid lap is black, and I want to show that by using a black icon here. So our main icon is red, and we click in there to determine the main lap with all the coloured channels. And then we can choose any of these other laps to overlay, and that will turn up as a black icon in here. Alright, so what we'll end up with is 2 laps sitting on top of one another. Now here's an example, and I've kept it as simple as possible. The more channels you stack up here, the more the data gets confusing. You want to try and have the largest screen that you can, and keep the number of channels initially nice and low. So in this example we have overlaid 2 laps. This isn't actually the data from the Bathurst race previous screen, but we have 2 tests conducted, and we get the request to how do we overlap 2 tests or overlay 2 tests. First we install our beacons, create laps, and then we click on those laps and overlay them here. So in this case I have engine RPM, throttle position and lambda or air fuel ratio on the screen. Now immediately, and as a result of manual beacon insertion, the beginning of those laps isn't at the same point. So straight away, in order for me to do proper comparisons, I need to line the laps up on top of one another. And the shortcut to that, the icon to do that, is right up the top of the screen here. I've got it circled. I'm sorry, it's a little small. And it's called the data offset axis. So if you click on that icon there, you will get 2 extra axes down the bottom here. Now normally you've only got 1 set of axes down the bottom that you can grab with your mouse and drag all the data left and right. Once you click the data offset axes, you get individual axis control or individual control of each overlay. So if we look down the bottom left hand corner here, you can see there's a red one. Now that red axis, which is the middle axis here, If you slide that with the mouse, that will slide all the coloured channels, which is the main lap. If you slide the bottom axis here, which is marked by the black icon, that will move the black data, which is your overlay lap. Now we can see here that I need to move the black data, the overlaid lap, to the right so it can line up with my coloured data, which is the main data. Sometimes it's a little confusing to see which lap is what is colours and which lap is overlay and black. Up the top here you can see each lap is displayed for you to view. That's probably on a poor screen resolution, this is going to be difficult to see, so if you can't see it now, you need to review the webinar on a better screen resolution. But certainly you can simply practice this on your own laptop. So up the top here we have lap 1 is selected, and we can show that there. And on the right hand side is in black is the overlay lap, and it says lap 3. So we now know that lap 1 is the coloured data and lap 3 is the black overlay data. So we need to drag the overlaid data to the right. We need to move it in that direction so I can line up these two pieces of data and look at what the differences are. Alright, having done that, this is what we see. Now can I just say at this point, normal data that's viewed in i2 isn't as chunky as this. We've actually made the traces twice as thick as normal to help you view in i2. Actually makes it look a little ugly for the or a little ugly as a display. When you look at it on your laptop, the traces will be a lot more defined, and you'll see a lot more definition of curve and trace changes. So we've lined up the two pieces of data here, and my initial reaction if this was on my laptop screen would be to zoom in right at this point here. We definitely have an issue with the main channel here. So the customer has accelerated quickly, like it's been an acceleration test, like a drag car, and you can see that I've scrolled axes over to perfectly overlay the throttle trace. You can see here that the throttle trace looks like almost one line. So that means that we have a perfect overlay. And if we look here now, just as an example, you can see that the red trace has gone up. Just look at that point there, and then dipped, and then had another go. So there is an issue with the main lap, main lot of data here, and that's something obviously that potentially we could have changed in the ECU tune-up, and the engine is now accelerating better, and this is a way of proving that we've fixed our problem. Now, there are literally thousands of different reasons that you would look at different channels to look at performance or reliability or all sorts of reasons to look at this data, so I can't go into all the examples, and this is more about the method of getting the two pieces of data together. Right, so that's what we're aiming for, to get complete alignment of the data. Once we've got that data lined up, we can start to use the cursor to place or get recordings, or view differences in numbers of the two channels. So we have the cursor placed at this point here, and this is where we're going to explain about the delta. Now the delta really is, I believe, an engineer's way of meaning difference. So if we now look at the channel, the engine RPM channel, the coloured data, remember, is the main data. So the main data in this case, the red, is at this point 8,335 RPM at this point where the cursor is. The overlaid data at this point is 8,188, and the delta or difference is 147. So that means that the main data is 147 more than the overlay data. Now, just looking at that graphically, you can't really see that. So you can make that assessment over two ways. We can look at the numeric value of the data, but another thing that you should look at doing if this part of the data is important to you is rescale it. So you can rescale this RPM channel and zoom right in on this particular trace so that you can physically see the difference in the lines. Now similarly, if we look down at the throttle position, we can easily see that the throttle is virtually 100% and there's no difference. And we can also see our air-fuel ratio, our lambda, has a very minor difference here. So we have an RPM difference, no throttle difference, and very little air-fuel ratio difference. So at this point I might want to bring on other channels and look at those comparisons. And in I2, of course, we can set up multiple screens with multiple channels and move across those screens quickly to try and determine differences in those different channels. Now there's some more information, and it's a good time to perhaps show you how you can view that information in another way. On the right hand side of your screen, sometimes on some screens you'll see it by default, is the values box. That values box gives you all the information of all the logged channels. Now you may choose to leave that box open so that as you scroll left and right through the data, you can see the numbers changing of all the different channels. Now when you're in an overlay mode where you have two pieces of data on top of one another, this values box gets wider and you see all the values of main data listed here and the overlay data here. Now normally we wouldn't actually try and view differences using that method, but it's useful to know that that's there and it exists. And likewise we can actually define the behavior of these columns of data. If we actually click on the overlay column, we can then see the difference that the main channel is above or below the overlay. So it's actually the delta of the difference between the overlay and the main. So you can get to see all those differences down there. So if you're hunting for a difference quickly, rather than put all those channels on and off a graph, you can look through this list here. And similarly, we can click on the main column, and this will give you the difference that the overlay is in relation to the main. So in this case, the overlay is 147 RPM less than main channel. Right, now, a little bit difficult for some people to get their head around, and certainly I was one of them, and probably still am in some degree. You can view the data in two different modes, two distinct modes across the x-axis on the bottom here. Now we can view the data based on time, and what that means is the x-axis, and in this example here, time is along the x-axis. And you can see that time's along the x-axis because there is a little red icon next to the time numeration down here. So by clicking the cursor in different positions, we can see not only the values at the cursor, but also the time down the bottom that we are into the log file. Now if this is an official lap created by beacons, you will see the time that you are into the lap, where you are in time on the lap. And the data is displayed in relation to time. Now if we're looking certainly on a circuit laps off a circuit car, if the laps are different in time, then it's difficult for us to make observations about track position when you're in time mode. So if you can see here where the arrow is now, the data isn't lined up, and that's because we're viewing it in time. So because the overlay lap was in fact faster, and it's arrived in time quicker at this point of the track. Now I know that the track, we're at a different point in the track because I've placed G-force lateral here, which is the left and right movement of the wheel. So at the beginning I can see this corner here. Here is some G going around a corner, and we see that the G traces are similar, but as we go along in time and as the driver is faster or slower, the 2 points in time that he is at a particular corner are different. So if I want to assess the speed in mid-corner for this particular corner here, where it's been a sharp corner, as you can see the G has quickly gone up and then down again, I can't view that data or view the data at that same point on the track. Now yes, I could go down to my axis here and slide it, but what you can do, the software allows you to view this data here based on distance, and that lines it up so that the data is based on the same point on the track. Now to do that, you push the key F9, and F9 toggles from time-based x-axis to distance-based x-axis. That will have the data look like that. So that's the exact same piece of data now based on distance. And across the bottom here, instead of time, we have actually meters. So we can see at this point we're 200 meters into the lap. And at this point here, where the cursor is, we are at 2,619 meters, or 2.6 kilometers into the lap. And now you can see by looking at the G trace that it's virtually overlaid. So we have 2 laps overlaid on top of one another, and any point we choose to look at the data, we know that is the same point on the track, and we can look at differences in speed, throttle position, driver, steering position, anything like that. In this case, it becomes very, very obvious that there's been an issue here. So the speed and RPM consequently are much, much lower at this point on the track, and that is at the same point on the track. And we can investigate the data further, bring any channel we like on and off onto this screen and see why that's been. Now, a useful tool to help you assess whether the gains have been good or bad on a particular lap. You can look at the lap time, but one lap could be a lot faster than another based on a particularly good corner. Whereas the rest of that lap could have been quite slow. So just because of a particularly good corner, a lap may have been a lot quicker. But in reality, earlier laps that may have been slightly slower as a lap time may have been better in other areas. So it's useful to see where you've made losses and gains in those 2 laps. Now by pressing F3, this brings up the variance. Now this variance is based on time. If you look at the y-axis of the variance parameter panel, you can see that we are talking about time here. And this is the difference between one lap and another. So at the beginning of the lap, the variance will always be the same because you're starting off square, both at the same time. And as the gain or loss from one lap to the other changes, you either go negative in time, positive in time. And in this case, we can see the variance is about the main lap over the overlaid lap. So we can see a big change or a big gain in time where the main lap was over the overlay lap. And so at this point, without even having all the traces up, or even if we had tuning related traces here, we could look at this point and go, wow, we made a big gain here. Wonder why that was. And the reason was, see here that the driver has made a big gain in speed and consequently RPM and consequently distance. So the distance gets measured as an increase in the variance. The real reason for this in reality was that the driver got on the brakes far too early coming into this particular corner. The rest of his laps were alright, so Just obviously maybe there was a car on the road, maybe it was a little green, scared about the speed, and the result is the overlay lap was much slower. Variance points us very quickly to that point, so we can quickly look along the variance and see a major change in the gain or loss between the two laps. Along here, the actual main lap, which was in fact I think a couple of seconds faster, did lose some time here, so you can see that this is something to concentrate on. And if I just look quickly, I can see that there was a short shift here. So the driver has changed quickly at this point, and that could easily be the reason that the speed has been a little slower through this part of the track. So again, it's a matter of going through the data and trying to pick the differences. Variance allows you to see where the major differences are and to concentrate on them. Finally today we can have a look at how to do multiple overlays. This is something that's only available in i2 Pro, and i2 Pro is used to view data from our devices with the Pro Analysis upgrade. If you have i2 Pro, you will see when you go to view laps an extra column turn up in the data box. So once this extra column is available, you can just keep clicking or adding in extra laps, and you can put on as many as you would like. So if you have 20 laps, you can bring in 20 different, well, you can bring all 20 in if you wish, all onto the same graph. But let me tell you, that's a lot of data. So what you're going to get is your main data and all your normal channel colors. Your first overlay will be all black, and then all of your first multiple overlay all those channels will be green. All the second multiple overlay, in this case channels, will be light blue, and then the third multiple overlay will be in a darker blue. The end result is you see that. Now generally for beginners that's probably a little bit much information, and if you've got 5 or 6 channels up in there, it's just a mass of color and squiggly lines. So it's useful while you're learning to keep the channel lines, the channels, as low as possible and keep the information as simple as possible. But we can use this, for example, to pick out channels or information that is obviously not right. So again, that same lap that we've been looking at earlier clearly stands out. Point at it, clearly stands out from this data. And we can see in an instant to concentrate on that lap and see what may have gone wrong. And similarly, if we saw a greater speed in a corner, somewhere like that, we could investigate that speed and try and work out how we got that speed. So the idea is the multiple overlays is a good way of having a very quick look at the entire race, one lap overlaid on top of another. Okay, that's it for how to create overlays. This webinar will be online in the next hour or so you can view it as many times as possible. And obviously if you have better resolution screens, it's a good idea to get that higher resolution onto your laptop, or on a laptop with that higher resolution, so you can view the information a little better.